Good morning, namaste, and welcome to the Vedanta Society of Greater Houston and our Sunday morning service. Om Ardram Jwalati Jyotirhamasmi Jyotir Jwalati Brahmahamasmi Yohamasmi Brahmahamasmi Ahamasmi Brahmahamasmi Ahamevaham mam juhomi swaha. Melting into the light, I am the light that shines. The light shines, the light which is Brahman. That which I am is nothing but Brahman. I exist, and I exist as Brahman. I myself offer myself into the infinite light, which is myself. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Om peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So this morning the topic is the Atman, and it forms part of the series I've been giving for some months now on the basic concepts of Vedanta. The basic concepts of Vedanta, that is, taking one by one the most basic ideas. We've dealt with dharma and karma and the reincarnation and Brahman, Ishvara, that is God. And so today I want to take up the concept of the self, Atman. Now, already in this series, one of the lectures in the series was on Brahman. And so one might think that, well, because the Upanishads identify the Atman with Brahman, Aham Brahmasmi, I, the self, am Brahman, then by speaking on Brahman, I've already spoken on the Atman. And so, of course, from one standpoint, that is true. But the emphasis is different. The emphasis is different because Brahman is the name for that infinite, vast reality when we're looking objectively, when we see this vast universe and say, what is that beyond this? What is the ultimate reality behind all of this? Then we name it Brahman. And so the approach to Brahman, though in the end we find that Brahman is the Atman, Brahman is the self, the approach to it is different, and that's why there's a different name for it, Brahman. And then another lecture in this series I gave was on the jiva, the individual soul, or the individual being. Actually, jiva doesn't mean just the soul. Jivatman means the individual soul, the individual self, the self individualized. And jiva means the whole complex, the living being, the being with the body, with the mind, with the vital force, and at their essence, the individualized consciousness, soul. And so there's the statement in Vedanta, the Shankaracharya's own statement, that Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya Jivo Brahmaiva Naparaha. The last part of that says, the last foot of that says, that this jiva itself, the individual is nothing but Brahman. And so having spoken about the jiva, I've spoken about the Atman also. So speaking about Brahman, I've spoken of the Atman. Speaking about the jiva, I've spoken of the Atman, because all of them in their essence are the same reality. But again, the approach is different. When I spoke about the jiva, I of course mentioned the Atman, the supreme Atman, but I was approaching it from the standpoint, and most of the discussion was around the embodied person. You as an embodied being, me as an embodied being with a body, with mind, with vital force, and consciousness at the heart of my being. But it was from that standpoint. So today I want to speak about the Atman as the Atman, approaching it as the self. So the approach will be somewhat different. Now the Atman in Hindu thought, in all of Hindu thought, is central. In fact, there are scholars who say that the Atman is the central principle, central defining principle of Hindu thought. And certainly there's a good argument for that. It's what distinguishes Hinduism from Buddhism. The Buddha said that there is no self, and yet Hinduism starts from the truth of the self, that the self is the primary truth, the first truth. The first thing that we know through self-awareness, I am, that experience I am, which is a universal experience, even in animals, even in insects, even in plants, that experience of I am. Not, of course, in the English language, but in their own way of perceiving, that perception of the truth, that I am. Not the words, but the fact that I am. That's the universal experience wherever there is sentience. That is the essence of sentience itself. And so it's, again, of central importance in Hinduism. All schools of Hindu philosophy, no matter how diverse they are, and the schools of Hindu philosophy are far more diverse than Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are from each other. Those three Abrahamic traditions find great differences among themselves, which they argue over. Hinduism, even within Vedanta, there is the one school of Hindu philosophy of Vedanta, there's more diversity than there is among these three schools. And then if you take all of the schools of traditional Hindu philosophy, then you have far greater diversity of opinion about everything. And so they also differ in their opinion of the nature of the self, but not in the existence of the self. That, again, you could say is the starting point of Hindu philosophy. And it's the idea of self, the definition of self that differentiates the different schools of Vedanta, and then Vedanta from other schools such as Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Sankhya, Yoga, etc. So the universality of the idea of the self. As I said, Buddhism begins by denying the self, that the self does not exist. There's no self to this universe, so there's no Brahman. There's no personalized self to this universe, so no Ishvara. And there is no self to any individual. You have no self, I have no self. The idea of self in Buddhism is the fundamental illusion. In Vedanta, in Hinduism in general, but especially in Vedanta, the ignoring of the self is the primordial ignorance, the unawareness of the true self. That is our primordial ignorance. That's the source of all of our problems. And so it's not the topic today. I won't develop it, but let me just say that having studied Buddhism for many years, that's really, to me, and I think that it's not just because I come from the Hindu standpoint, because I started studying Buddhism and Hinduism together, not as a Hindu studying Buddhism, but I started as a seeker studying both. And would have, if I had found it first, I would have entered a Buddhist monastery rather than a Vedanta monastery. But having continued my study, that to me is the central weakness of Buddhist thought. There are certain other weaknesses, and all schools of thought have some weakness, but in Buddhist thought, that's the central weakness, the denial of the self. Vedanta says that the self is the one thing we can't deny, and I'll come back to that and develop it much more further into the talk. So in Buddhist thought, they deny the self. In the Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, they don't deny the self, though old classical Judaism, or I shouldn't say classical, that's not the term that's used, but the Judaism of pre-rabbinic Judaism, the Judaism of the Torah, of the old, what the Christians call the Old Testament, the old text of the Jews, there was not a developed idea of soul. They had no idea of soul, as rabbis themselves have told me. There was no idea of soul. Soul came into Judaism later, after the diaspora, after the destruction of the temple. So in Abrahamic traditions, that is Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, they're others also, like Baha'ism, and also the, I forget what they're called, anyway, there are a few other minor, of course, Baha'is are not minor, but there are some minor schools of Abrahamic religions also. But the principal ones are that we all know of are Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And in those traditions, the emphasis was on the nature of God. Who is God? What is the nature of God? And that's why in old Judaism, they didn't develop the idea of soul, because God was the value. God was the truth. God was the reality. God was the source of everything. God was everything. God was the value. And the soul was not even looked into. In Christianity, of course, the soul was important. In Islam also, the soul is important. And it became important in Judaism as well. Mystical Judaism has well-developed ideas of the soul. But none of the Abrahamic traditions have developed the idea of soul to the point that it was developed in the Vedanta. Again, because the attention was turned towards God. Who is God? What is God? What is our relationship to God? And that also distinguishes the Hindu tradition from the Abrahamic traditions, the central importance of the self, more important in the Upanishads than the nature of God. Later in Hinduism, God got a great deal of attention through the devotional schools, though they came up with quite different ideas from the Abrahamic traditions. Not conflicting, not contradicting, but a very different approach to the idea of God. And so, again, the centrality of the idea of self in Hinduism. In Greek thought, another stream of thought, one of the highly influential streams of thought that has influenced world thought through the cultural domination, the cultural imperialism of the West. Greek thought has also Greek and Roman thought, but principally the Romans were experts at administration, at organization, but the Greeks were the fountainhead of Western thought. And so as Western culture spread around the world, Greek thought spread through Western thought. And so in Greece also, the emphasis was not on the self. They had some ideas about the self, but the emphasis in Greece was not on the nature of God either, though that wasn't ignored. But the emphasis was on this. What is this? What is form? For instance, even Plato, one of the more mystically oriented of the ancient Greek philosophers, and yet even for him, the primary interest was, what is all of this? And he tried to look behind it, but he was looking behind this for the ideal forms and so forth. How do we know that a dog is a dog when every dog is different from every other dog? And yet we have an idea of dogness. So where does that come from? So the Greeks were principally concerned with this. Ancient Jewish thought was principally concerned with God. Who is God? The world itself was secondary. And that's why in Christianity, which came out of Judaism, there was for such a long time a fight between Christianity and science. That didn't exist in Judaism so much, but it did certainly exist in Christianity. Some forms of Orthodox Judaism, yes, but not so much as in Christianity. So you have this emphasis on God, you have this emphasis on the world, but in ancient times, thousands of years ago, though the Hindus, the Vedic Hindus and the later classical Hindus, though they turned their attention to the nature of God, and though they turned their attention to the nature of the world also, the primary concern was with the nature of the self. And that remains important even in the devotional schools of philosophy. So the Vedas also began in a similar direction to other streams of world thought. That is, they began by looking out here. And that's what a child does. A child begins by, what is this? Where have I come? What is this? for some strange reason, for some strange debility within our consciousness as human beings and as other beings as well, we assume the self. We assume the existence of the self somehow. We don't know who we are, we don't know what we are, but we kind of assume, because all of our senses, as the Katha Upanishad says, all of our senses are turned outside. And so we come into the world and we don't ask, well, who am I? We just think, well, I am. I know who I am. Parents give us a name, and we have an address, and we know we have a birthday, and what else do we need to know? That's enough. That's who I am. So we're interested in this. So the Vedas also originally turned their attention to the outer world. What is this outer world? And to the gods. Who are the forces that are behind the universe and behind all of my own sensory operations, mental operations? What are the forces which direct everything in this universe? And so they turned their attention to the gods and to the world itself. But that didn't last. By the time you come to the Upanishads, the full attention was given to self-inquiry. That started in the Vedas earlier than the Upanishads. But by the time of the Upanishads, that more primitive turning out to the outer world looking for an answer, that by the time of the Upanishads, the Vedic civilization had realized that's not where the answer is to be found. There's no answer to be found outside. We have to look within. So why did they turn to the self? Why did they look within to find the truth of things, rather than continuing the search outside, which Western civilization, based on Greek thought, has continued to do? And why didn't they continue to look into the nature of the gods, as the Abrahamic traditions continued to do? Because there's several reasons, but they're all tied together. One of the reasons, which is related to all of these reasons, is that if I don't understand myself, how can I understand anything? I am the one who perceives this universe. And where do I perceive it? I perceive it within my awareness. I am the one who am aware of the universe. I go to sleep and the universe disappears. I wake up and the universe appears. So the secret of perception certainly lies within me, and the universe is perceived. I don't have any other way of knowing that the universe exists except through my perception of it. I have no way of proving an external objective universe unrelated to my perception. I only know the universe of my perception. So if I don't know who I am, the perceiving self, how do I know anything? The world is really experienced again within my perception, within myself. Then it's found through spiritual practice that to a perceptive soul, you can go through your spiritual life, a sincere spiritual life, and progress and never notice this. But if you're perceptive, you'll find that as you change, as your consciousness changes, as your being changes, your perception of yourself changes, your perception of the universe changes as well. At one time, you're afraid of everything, and then you overcome fear and you realize that there's nothing to fear. At one time, you dislike all kinds of people. Maybe there are ethnic groups, or racial groups that you don't like, or you're suspicious of, and so forth. And then you grow, your heart becomes wider, you expand, and you realize that we all share common humanity. Maybe you're afraid of nature. You've been brought up in the big city and you're afraid of going out into the forest and things. But then you come to an even further expansion of mind that includes not only other people, but animals and plants and the world itself. And you begin to feel at home with everything. As you change, your perception of the world itself changes. If you are very depressed, you find that the world looks like a very dull and gray place, colorless, without any interest, without any evoking any interest. But then as you overcome your depression, you begin, and your mind begins to become calm, and you begin to develop deeper powers of perception. There's a brightness about the world that comes, and a joyfulness about existence itself that comes. And so your perception of the world changes. And then in the Upanishads, there was the search for consciousness. Because again, consciousness was understood as the light of experience itself. The strange thing that, as I mentioned many times in my talks, that in the West, there was never any serious investigation into consciousness. Never any serious investigation into consciousness. Again, consciousness was assumed. That consciousness means my conscious mind, my conscious thinking, and I don't know anything beyond thinking. Thinking seems to be the highest thing that I can do. And so consciousness just is a process of thinking consciously. Consciousness is nothing separate from thinking itself. But in India, they began to realize through the great discipline that the earlier Vedas had given to the Vedic people to perform the rituals and so forth. They had to be precise in the performance, precise in the construction of the altar, precise in the recitation of the mantras. They had to study grammar to be aware of proper enunciation and proper interpretation and all of that. That gave great discipline to the mind, and as the mind is disciplined, the mind becomes clear, and then one begins to become more aware of consciousness itself. And so the search for consciousness began. In contrast to the Greeks were great thinkers, but their interest again was in form. Form meaning the stuff of this world, the stuff of matter. Matter is the stuff which makes form, visible form. And so they were interested in form and in logic, the logical processes of thinking, rational thinking, how to think properly, and how to discover the nature of all of this. So again, the Vedic Hindus, they began to turn their attention inside. So another reason why they began to seek the self is that one can't doubt one's own existence. One can't doubt one's own self. So when one begins to seek the self, one begins to see an equation between the self and consciousness. So I'll come back to that again later. So therefore, for these reasons, there was the turning towards the self in ancient India. So let me come for a moment to the word Atman, the word which is used for self in Sanskrit and through Sanskrit in modern Indian languages, and which we use also for the self to express what we mean by self. That by self, we're not speaking in Jungian terms, we're not speaking in ordinary Western terms, we're not speaking in Christian or Jewish terms of self, that we're speaking from a particular standpoint of self when we use the term Atman. So now the Sanskrit term Atman, it's a cognate of certain other Indo-European words. That is, it's related. It's tied in its origin, in its sound, and its origin to certain other Indo-European words. The original meaning of Atman seems to have been breath and or essence. And the two are tied together, breath and essence, because the breath, for all ancient people, breath was considered the essence of a person's life. You can go without food for a month before you die, at least a month without food before you die. You can go without water for a week or two before you die. But you can't go without breath for more than several minutes before there is brain death. And so the breathing is the most vital function that we have accessible to us. Of course, there's the heartbeat, but we generally don't have direct access to the heartbeat, but we do to the breath. And it's observed by ancient people, as it's observed today, that when a person dies, the first visible sign is the stop of their breath. Then you may feel to see if there's a pulse, but sometimes the pulse itself can be so weak that you can't feel it without instrumentation, even though there's a slight pulse still continuing. And ancient people didn't have such instrumentation. So the clearest way of telling if a person was dead was that their breath has stopped. And so there was an equation between life and self and breath. In fact, in the Torah or the Christian Old Testament or the Jewish Torah, it said that God breathed the life into Adam. God formed Adam and then breathed life into him. And so our breath is the breath of life which God has given us, and that is the essence of our being. So again, you see this equation all over the world between breath, essence, life, and self. And so the original word seems to have meant that. There was an old English word, ethian, which meant to breathe. We don't have a word coming from that Old English root in modern English, but in Old English, which was a Germanic language, ethian was meant to breathe. And ethian scholars have related to Atman. And then in modern German, you have Atmen. I don't know German, but I looked this up, and it says that Atmen means to breathe in modern German. And then in Greek, you have atmosphere, the English word which comes from the Greek atmosphere. Atmos also comes from breath. And so all of these are related to the etymologically, according to scientists, or to linguists, to the Sanskrit Atman. But because it also meant essence, it came soon to mean the essence of the self, that which I am. The essence of something is its self. My essence must be who I am. The essence of me is who I am. That means myself. And so essence and self are, as ideas, as concepts, they're inextricably tied. And so at an early time in the Vedas already, the Atman means the self, the inner self, the inner essence of a being or of a thing. And so in the Vedas, just as when I say self in English, and I'm thinking and speaking in English, I can think, well, this is myself, or I can think of my body as myself, or I can think of my mind as myself, or I can think of my soul as myself. So in Sanskrit, Atman can mean the body. When I think of the body as myself, then this is my Atman. But Atman can also in the Vedas refer to the mind. And the Atman can also refer to the center of consciousness which I am, the essence of my being, which is pure consciousness, the true self, the true Atman. And so in the Vedas especially, Atman just means self, and it can refer to these different levels of perception of self. In developmental psychology, which studies how people develop from infancy through adulthood, for a small child, they don't make any distinction between the mind and the body. They can't make a distinction between mind and body. Everything is very physical to them. They don't have abstract ideas or anything, and they haven't awakened to the world of the mind. They think, of course, they perceive in a childlike way, but they're not aware of thinking as separate from the body. Their thinking is very physical. So even in elementary school, 1st through 6th grades, educationists teach that we should teach children through very concrete means. That's why there are children who do very well in elementary school and don't do so well later in school. And there are others who don't do so well in elementary school, but do very well in higher education. Of course, some do well all the way through school, but that's because the difference. Those who do well with concrete thinking, they do well in elementary school. And if they always remain as concrete thinkers, they don't do as well in higher level studies. Whereas those who have an orientation towards abstract thinking, they may not be interested, as I wasn't. I had no interest in elementary school. I hated school. I absolutely despised school. Until I got to the 8th grade, even up through the 7th grade, I hated school. But it was in the 8th grade, for the first time, that they started presenting me with abstract ideas. And then I realized the love of learning. And we start with an awareness of ourselves as the body, as small children do. And then there's a age, I forget what the age is, but where children begin to develop the idea of themselves as mental beings, as not just physical, but the awareness of the mind awakens. And then the awareness of abstract ideas and so forth, higher levels of mind. So again, the word Atman means self and can refer to any of these levels where we have our sense of self, the locus of our sense of self, wherever it is. So, but in the Vedas and in the Upanishads, of course, it clearly came to mean principally, though they mention self in at these other levels, Atman, but Atman came principally to refer to what we consider in Vedanta the true self, which is pure infinite consciousness, the perfection within us. And so in the Upanishads and in later Vedanta, we have the idea of the Jivatman, which I spoke about once before in this series of basic concepts. The individualized consciousness, which we see ourselves to be now, and the Paramatman, the Supreme Self, which we actually are. The real Atman without any limiting adjunct. That which we really are, if we come to the Jivatman and find ourselves as individualized consciousness, then there's just one further step to realize that there is no limitation in consciousness, that individualization itself is an assumption, a false assumption made about consciousness. And then we realize I am pure consciousness. So in the Upanishads, there are two main ways of arriving at the awareness of the self. There's the objective and there's the subjective method of arriving at the Atman. The objective way is the search for Brahman. And so you find in the Taittiriya Upanishad, the 3rd chapter of the Taittiriya Upanishad, 3rd and last, which is entitled Bhrigu Valli, the chapter on Bhrigu. Bhrigu was a young boy who goes to his father and asks him, "Oh, revered sir, please teach me Brahman." And so his father teaches him that Brahman is that out of which this universe has come, that in which this universe rests, and that to which the universe returns when it dissolves. Practice concentration, practice tapas, austerity, which principally means controlling the mind and focusing the mind. Practice that and you will understand Brahman. So then Bhrigu, the boy, goes and practices tapas. And then he comes back to his father and says, "I've understood the Brahman, that Brahman is matter. It's out of matter that this world has come. It's in matter that this world exists, and it's to matter that the world returns." And again, his father says, "Practice tapas, because tapas is Brahman, and through that you will understand the nature of Brahman." So he goes back, realizing that that matter is not sufficient explanation. And then he comes to his father again and says, "I have understood the nature of Brahman. Brahman is the vital force, because it's out of the vital force that is energy. It's out of energy that even this universe of matter has come. It's in energy that all of this exists, this dynamic universe which is bubbling out of energy, the manifestation of energy. And it's to energy that this universe collapses." He uses the term prana, but meaning energy. And then his father tells him again, "Practice tapas, because Brahman is tapas." And so again, Bhrigu practices deep meditation, and he finds that this universe is mind. Out of mind, this universe has come. In mind, it rests, and into mind, it dissolves. So that was a much deeper, that's a profound step. That's where science, the leading scientists, are on the verge of discovering that now. They haven't, but they're on the verge of discovering that now. So when you look, so again, this is all looking to the objective, trying to understand this universe, where this universe has come from. And he's led to the point where he understands, first, it's matter outside, then it's energy outside, but now he understands that no, this universe exists within mind, that this is a mental universe. That was the first time I heard that idea. I was 13 or 14, I forget now. I was in the 8th or 9th grade. Probably, I think it was the 8th grade. I read the book, The Universe and Dr. Einstein by Lincoln Barnett. It was one of those early popularizations of modern physics, the theories of theoretical physics. And so this in particular was a popularization of the ideas of Einstein's relativity theory. And in that, I still remember, Lincoln Barnett says that modern science has come to the point where they find that this universe is more mental than a physical fact. This universe is a more mental idea than physical fact. And when I read that, I knew it was true. I didn't have the intellectual equipment to understand it, but something in me knew that this is a great and important truth, that this universe is more mental than physical. So Brigu understood that. So now he had begun to turn from the external to the internal. By looking in the external, he was turning to the internal. And then he goes on until he finds that Brahman is reality itself, consciousness itself. And then the end of the chapter ends with the beautiful song of Brigu's ecstasy, where he realizes he is the subject of experience, the experiencer. He's the object of experience, and he's the underlying unity of both. That is, I'm the subject who sees this universe. The universe is the object. But in the highest state, Brigu realized that I'm the subject, I'm the object, and I'm the unity which links both. So he had that experience of the highest self, starting from the objective standpoint. But then there's the subjective, beginning with the question of who am I, looking into the self. What is the nature of my mind, trying to refine the mind as an instrument and turning it within oneself. This, the Taittiriya Upanishad, as I said, I'm not the Taittiriya Upanishad, the Katha Upanishad. I'm sorry, the Katha Upanishad, which I hadn't yet referred to, this refers to that process. There's a famous verse in the Katha Upanishad, Parang chikani vyatranat swayambhu, tasmat parang pashyati nantaratman, kasti dhira pratyagatmanam aikshad, avrita chakshur pratyagatmanam, avrita chakshur amritatvam. So that says that the senses have been wounded as they were created. They were wounded so that they only turn outside and see the outer world, not the inner self. So it's an interesting term, that the senses, when they were created, they were wounded so that they only see outside, not the inner self. So from birth, we're wondering, what is all of this? We don't turn inside and say, who am I? We say, what is all of this? And most people never go beyond that. What is this? And so it says that the senses were wounded in their creation so that they look to the outer self, not to the inner self. But some kasti dhira, some great soul, desiring immortality, turned his sight within, that is, turned his attention within, and there desiring immortality, and there beheld the eternal self. And so through an internal analysis also, one can come to the consciousness of the self. So in a spiritual process, there is the process of neti neti, not this, not this. Trying to seek for the essence of consciousness. Who am I? It was understood that anything that I can perceive, that's an object, that's not who I am. So then in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, it says, Neti Neti Atma. The self is found through a process of not this, not this. The outer world is an object of my perception. That can't be who I am. This body is an object of my perception. That can't be who I am. Thoughts arise, emotions arise, reactions arise, noise arises, images arise. I see all of it. That's not who I am. I am the unseen seer. So neti, 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 not this, not this, not this, not this. And trying to find the unseen seer. Not that you can see it as an object. Anything that you can objectify is not who you are. And so you try to get rid of objectification and rest as the unseen seer. And then we can know consciousness itself. So that was the essence of the subjective method. But that neti neti process has within it an iti iti. Na iti na iti, not this, not this. But there's also an iti, not as an object, but there's an iti which we are seeking, and that is the root of our very conscious being. So I've often said, but let me repeat it briefly, that Descartes, René Descartes, the great mathematician and philosopher, French mathematician and philosopher of the 17th century, he followed a very Vedantic process. I'll give the abbreviated form of it now. He wanted to know, what do I know for sure? Not what I think I know, but what do I know for sure? He said, well, I can't be sure of the outer world because it's known to me only through these senses. And if my senses are not functioning properly, I have a distorted view of the world. And maybe I was born, maybe we're all born with defective senses, so we're not seeing the world correctly. So I can't depend on the outer world and can't depend on the senses for understanding them because I don't know that they're trustworthy. But then what about my mind? Well, my mind could be, my thinking could be distorted. I think that I'm thinking correctly, but I don't know because I assume that my logic, my reason is serving me. But I'm not sure of that. And so I can't trust my thinking either. So then he said, so I can doubt the outer world, I can doubt the world of my thoughts, but I can't doubt myself because I'm present in the midst of the doubt. When I'm doubting myself, I am there in the midst of the doubt. How can I doubt that, my own existence? I can't. Unfortunately, he didn't understand the great truth which he had discovered, and so he was satisfied with the lower truth. And again, for time's sake, I won't go into that. But what he should have realized through that process is that self-existence is self-evident. My existence is self-evident. I am. Whether I'm in the waking state, whether I'm in the dream state, whether I'm in the deep sleep state, whether I'm knocked unconscious, I am. And that sense of I am never leaves me. But it's so basic to all of my existence, so basic to all of my perception that I don't perceive that itself. I'm unconscious and just think I'm unconscious. No, I am is there also. The perception of just the I am, devoid of all thought and perception, is there. And so the I am is the basic experience which is eternal, which never changes, which is the background of all other perception and all states of consciousness. And so we can see the great thought experiment that Descartes did, and only bemoaned that he came so close, and yet he became satisfied with the lower explanation of what he had understood. So to understand Advaita, non-dual view of the self, we have to learn to become subjective. Now, for everybody, that's not the path for everybody. But if we want to follow the path of knowledge, that's what we have to do to follow the path of knowledge, if that's our path. And that's what I'm talking about today, because I'm talking about the Atman. So I have to learn the subjective standpoint. What do I actually experience? What is my actual experience? Not what people have taught me, not what society, not what science has taught me, but learn to examine my experience itself. What do I actually experience? I find that when I go to sleep, this whole universe disappears. So again, society and all of your friends and your family and scientists, learned people, everyone will tell you, well, that's just because you were asleep. The world was here, but you were the one who was sleeping, so you didn't perceive it. But no, what is my experience? What am I experiencing? I wake up and the world appears. The world wasn't here. I go to sleep and then the dream world appears. If I look at the states of consciousness, the dream world, the deep dreamless sleep world, and the waking world, I realize that the perception of this world is dependent upon a particular state of the mind. So how can I give absolute reality to this world, To think that this is real and everything else is unreal. The sleep state, the dreaming state is unreal. This alone is real. No, this too is dependent on a state of consciousness. You say, no, Swami, the world is real. It's objective. Your changes, your consciousness change, but that doesn't affect the world. Certainly it does. It affects it for everybody. Is there anyone who sees the world as an objective world? No. Everyone sees it only as a state of consciousness. Only in a particular state of consciousness this world appears. In a different state of consciousness this world disappears. So in that way we have to learn to look at experience subjectively if we want to follow the path of knowledge. Those who aren't interested, then that's a different question. Forget about it. Even philosophy, even Advaita philosophy, but philosophy of any kind, even it objectifies experience. Even Advaita philosophy translates the experience of the self, the subjective realization of pure subjectivity, into objective concepts. And thereby it distorts the truth by translating experience into concepts that the mind can deal with. That's why philosophy doesn't point to the philosophy only indicates the truth. It doesn't reveal the truth. And so that's why Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, always emphasized that it's not through study that one realizes the self. Why the Upanishads themselves say it's not through study of the Vedas that one realizes the self. So we have to learn to see rather than to think. If you follow the path of bhakti, you have to learn to feel rather than to think. And in the path of knowledge, you have to learn how to see rather than to think. Thinking is important because thinking clears the mind of misconceptions. Thinking assures us that we're on the right path by thinking out logically and systematically and so forth, reasoning about things. That's important. That clears the path and gets us in the right direction. But the path itself is not thinking. Thinking is, as Swami Vivekananda said, thinking is just the street sweeper. It just clears away the garbage. But the actual path is trying to see in the path of knowledge and trying to feel in the path of devotion. In the path of devotion, you try to feel the presence of God. You try to feel when you're praying to God that God is there and you're speaking to God. God is listening. If you practice that, trying to feel the presence of God, excuse me, a time comes when you actually begin to, when you pray, you actually tangibly feel that God is listening to you. And then you can talk to God because you have the feeling that God is listening. You don't see it, but you feel it. And so in the path of devotion, we have to learn how to feel. That is not sentimentality, but trying to feel that which we don't yet see. And in the path of knowledge, we try to see. We try to see through the illusion, to see the truth. So in the approaches to the self, again, as I said, in the Upanishads, there were objective and there were subjective approaches. So let me briefly deal with approaches that we can take. We don't have to go back to the Upanishadic times. We can take inspiration and instruction, but ways that we can do. One way because some people find it impossible to think subjectively. We're all trained to think objectively, and that's okay. That also is a valid path. And most people, even most Advaitins, those who at least espouse the philosophy, that's the path that they take. So one is by meditating on light within the heart, as that is who I am. I am this light within the heart. The light is my imagination. Eventually I may see the real light of the self, but then it's not experienced as an imagination, nor is it experienced as an object which I see within the heart. It's experienced as who I am. And so we start with an objective meditation on the light within the heart, or the light within the Bhrumadhye, within the Ajna Chakra, between the eyebrows, or the light on the top of the head, which in general is not a good idea because it's advanced meditation which can cause problems. So meditation within the heart is good. Or meditation on Om. Om is the self. It's the revealing word of the self. But when I meditate on Om, it's an objective meditation. I'm trying to come through it to the realization of the subjective self. But I start by meditating on Om. It's the sacred sound, Om. I meditate on that. That's an objective meditation. Or I can meditate on God. God is my inner self. And so if I meditate on God, it's an objective meditation on the self. God is the self of my own self. What does that mean, the self of my own self? If myself is the essence of who I am, then the self of myself is my real essence. So God is my real essence. So by meditating on God, I'm meditating on myself. So these are all objective ways of approaching non-dualism. Or there's the subjective methods. I can hold on to the sense of I, just the bare sense I am. In the beginning, when someone tells you this, you have no idea what you're supposed to do because we've never done that. We never thought in those terms. It seems extremely abstract, and how in the world you hold on to the sense of I. All you can think of is, well, somehow I try to hold on to the word, like using it like a mantra, I, and I've just got a sound. That's not I. So we have to learn how to hold on to just the sense I am. Not the words or the phrase, not the sound, not using it as a mantra, but just becoming aware of the fact that I am. We can do it. It takes time to develop it, but we can do it because that's the primary perception we have before any other perception. That's the background of all of our universe of experience in all states, is the sense I am. That's the most basic perception we have. And we have it all of the time. It's just that it's so basic, so background, so fundamental to everything else that we don't even see it. But it is the first primordial perception. In fact, it's not even primordial. It's prior to primordial. It's before the beginning of anything, before the beginning of the world. So hold on to the sense of I am. And gradually, as you get that and you go deeper into it, you find that that leads you deeper and deeper, holding on to just the sense of I am. Or in the method taught by Ramana Maharshi, which is also an Upanishadic method, ask, who am I? Try to seek the self. Again, not as a mantra, not who am I, who am I, who am I, who am I, who am I? No, not like that. But just the frame of mind, trying to ask as a living question, as a frame of mind, not as words, but who am I? Seeking to find out who I am. Another way is to hold on to the sense of existence. It's related to holding on to the I am, but if that's too abstract, though this also is abstract, but a little less so, just you have the sense of existing. The sense of existing, you have the sense of everything existing. And so just hold on to the sense of existence. Existence is experienced how? It's a direct experience all of us have, but we're not used to thinking in those terms, which makes it difficult. But it's the experience of presence, the sense I have that everything, I and the universe around me, is present. That's the experience of existence. And then if I can hold on to that, then all of these things, including this body and thoughts and perceptions and things, those no longer get in the way. It's just presence itself, the ocean of presence, the ocean of existence, which I am. Hold on to that. Or approach it through trying to find out what consciousness is. I am the light which illuminates all my experience. I'm conscious of the world. I'm conscious of this body. I'm conscious of my thoughts. But what is that awareness that illuminates everything? Try to hold on to the light of awareness which illuminates everything else. So hold on to the sense of consciousness, or practice the Sakshi Bhava, the attitude of the witness, that I am the witness of everything. This whole universe, my own body and mind, and this universe arise within my awareness. Let me just witness as the uninvolved witness, because consciousness is uninvolved. Consciousness is the ocean in which all of this takes place, and yet consciousness is undisturbed and untouched by anything. I am that consciousness, so let me be the silent witness. So let me just, before I close, deal a little bit with what this world is. When we begin to take the subjective standpoint and try to see what is it that I actually experience, then I see that My experience is always, and this is true of every being, is true even of an insect, which has much more field of vision than we do. They can see things mostly behind them and around them, above them and below them, with these huge eyes that have so many cells through which they perceive. But all of us, including insects, we perceive a bubble of experience. We assume that that's just what my eyes are perceiving and my ears can hear, but outside of that, there's this vast world. But when you think about it, again, when you come to what do I actually perceive and what does anyone actually perceive, we only perceive bubbles of experience. Is there anyone who actually perceives the whole universe not as a bubble of experience? Even Brahma, the creator, in whom this whole vast universe exists. We see our little bubble, each of us our different little bubble from our different perspectives. But Brahma, the creator of everything, the universe is a bubble within his experience also. That's what the world is, nothing but a bubble of experience. What is outside of the bubble? That is reality. And so this body is part of this bubble. Every being perceives the world through a body, and the body is part of this bubble of experience that we see. Again, whether it's an insect or a human being or a dog or whatever, we see the bubble of experience, including this body, as part of it. And yet we separate this out and say, this is me and this is not me. No, it's all part of the bubble of the same. So is there a world separate from the perception of the world? No. Try to think of the world where there's no perception of it. Does it exist? So immediately we can think of some distant galaxy where there's a star in a solar system where nobody exists. And so we say, of course, yeah, certainly there are stars out there that no one has seen, no one has perceived. When you think of them, where are they? Within your perception. If no one has perceived them, even Brahma, the creator, has not perceived them, do they exist? No, they don't exist. The world is a world of perception, and a world of perception alone. Even Brahma sees the world as a bubble of experience. It's just that Brahma sees the totality of this creation. And we say our bubbles are much smaller. His bubble is vast, ours are smaller. But they're both just bubbles of experience. So now it's coming time to conclude. It is time to conclude. So let me just say a couple more things, and then I'll make a statement of conclusion. And that is that Sri Ramakrishna, first let me again quote that statement of Shankaracharya. Brahma satyam jagan mitya jivo brahmaiva naparaha. Brahma satyam. Brahman is true. Jagan mitya, this universe is false. Jivo brahmaiva naparaha. This individual self is none other than Brahman. The Atman is none other than Brahman. Now, Sri Ramakrishna used to discourage that idea of Jagan mitya, this universe is false. He emphasized rather the reality of God and the impermanence of this universe. That this universe, know that it's impermanent, as the Buddhists say. That yes, this universe is impermanent. Everything comes and goes, and that's true. Swami Vivekananda also, though sometimes he would speak of the unreality of the world, he more often emphasized the reality of Brahman and taught people to see God within everything, to see everything as the visible God, and to worship everything as God. Not that God has become the world, no, but that as Swami Vivekananda would say, the world is not, God is. And so when you see the world, see that the world is God. It's just your wrong vision that sees the world as separate from God. So both of them didn't speak much. Swami Vivekananda more, Sri Ramakrishna very little, of the unreality of the world. Why? Because ideas have social consequences. Ideas have social consequences. That's why Swami Vivekananda discouraged for ordinary people the Vaishnava practice of Madhura Bhava. He said that unless you are very pure-minded, then that will lead you astray. And he felt that the widespread practice and dissemination of the idea of Madhura Bhava through the school of Bengal Vaishnavism had done great harm. He regarded Chaitanya as an incarnation of God, a great knower of God, but he felt that, again, ideas have social consequences. Swamiji worshipped Buddha, said that he was the greatest man who ever lived, and yet he thought that Buddhism had done great harm to India because ideas have social consequences. We see that right now today in America. Political leaders tell conscious lies, things that they know that are lies, and it turns half of the country wild, it turns half of the country mad because of a false idea which is spread. Ideas have social consequences. And so in spiritual life also, to tell people for whom this is everything, that the world doesn't exist, then that takes the very ground under their feet. They don't have Brahman, they don't have God, the world doesn't exist, then what do you do with that? Then what does anything matter? I can kill myself, doesn't matter. I can kill somebody else, it doesn't matter. Nothing, the world is unreal. Nothing matters. So no, that's a destructive idea, and that's why Sri Ramakrishna always discouraged that idea and encouraged rather the idea that to think of the eternal, not of the temporary. And why Swami Vivekananda emphasized more the reality of Brahman than the unreality of the world. But ultimately, it's found that the world is unreal. So that's not a standpoint for practice. But it is Sri Ramakrishna at the end of his life, he asked, as he often would do, there were rhetorical questions, and he would ask rhetorical questions, trying to get an answer from his disciples to test their understanding. So at the end of his life, he said, why is it now that I see everything as unreal? Because he had always emphasized that God is real, but not that the world is unreal. But at the end of his life, he said, now I see everything is unreal. Why? And Holy Mother, at the end of her life, had a similar experience. So that's an ultimate experience. And the Vedanta is bold enough to declare that as an ultimate truth. But we have to know where we are and how we can practice and how ideas affect us and affect others. So eventually we find that, yes, the self alone is true. The self alone is true. But even in that, as long as I see the world, as Sri Ramakrishna taught Totapuri, and as Swami Vivekananda lived in his own life, as long as I see the world, let me see it as Brahman. Let me see everything within it as Brahman. Let me see everything within it as pure spirit, as a manifestation of consciousness, because that's what it is. If I'm seeing it, I can't deny it. I have to deal with it. I can't say this desk doesn't exist. I'm sitting in front of it. I'm using it to support my papers. If I pretend that it doesn't exist, I'm a hypocrite. But let me see everything as a manifestation of Brahman. So let me close with a statement of Swami Vivekananda's from one of his beautiful lectures in California called The Goal. He says, can you realize there will come a time when everything will crumble in the dust? Just stopped for that motorcycle to pass by. Let me start over. Can you realize there will come a time when everything will crumble in the dust and you will stand alone? That moment of ecstatic joy will never leave you. You will actually find that you are without bodies. You never had bodies. I am one, alone, through all eternity. Whom shall I fear? It is all myself. So that is when we realize the Atman in its fullness. I alone exist. I am the eternal. Not saying you don't exist, I exist, Swami Atmarupananda. No, to realize that we go far beyond identifying with a little body and mind with a personal history. We find that the self is, And the sense of I am within everyone and within everything, that is the self itself, which I am. That sense I have within me, that you have within you, which the insect has, that sense I am, that sense is universal. The I am is universal. So as we hold on to that sense I am, we begin to see that the I am is less and less personal. At first, I am, okay, I feel my existence. I, Swami Atmarupananda, feel my existence. But I go on holding on to it, and I begin to feel that no, the I am itself has nothing to do with Swami Atmarupananda. I am, and that is me, I am. That doesn't change. That's still my identity, I am. But I realize that that identity I am, which I am, is universal. That everything in the universe is saying I am, that's my I am. I am there I am, but again, that's objectifying it, putting it out there. And so you don't do that. You begin to realize the sense of the I am which you have, that becomes universal. That within that, the whole universe exists. The sun rises within the I am. The sun sets within the I am. The moon appears in the night sky in the I am. The stars are twinkling in the I am. Everything happens within the I am, and that I am. So Advaita, non-dualism, doesn't say you don't exist, but the Atman exists. No, the Atman is I am. And that's who I am. And there's no you, there's no he, she, or it. There's just I am, and that is universal. So with that, I will close. I won't take questions today because it's already late. I'm sorry for that. I'll give announcements and then a closing prayer. So for announcements, on Tuesday, we'll have the Gita class as usual on YouTube at 7:30 in the evening. On Thursday, there will be the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna class at 11 o'clock in the morning, also live streamed on YouTube. And next Sunday, gosh, I looked it up the other day. Now I've forgotten again what I'm speaking on next Sunday, but there will be a lecture I know. I'm speaking next Sunday in the series on small Vedantic texts. Next Sunday, I will speak on the Vedanta Sara, the essence of Vedanta. It's a traditional text which is considered the basic introductory text to the field of Vedanta. So that I will speak about next Sunday. So with that, let me give a closing chant. Om Dyo Shanti Antariksham Shanti Prithvi Shanti Apashanti Oshadhaya Shanti Vanaspataya Shanti Vishwe Deva Shanti Brahma Shanti Sarvam Shanti Shantireva Shanti Sama Shantiredhi Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace is in the heavens, peace is in the sky, peace is on earth, peace is in the plants, the waters, and the trees. The gods are peace. Peace is the nature of truth. All is peace. Peace alone, peace. May that peace, real peace, be with us all. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all the beings of the universe.